So this is just a quick summary of what to or what not to do for a design for an artist talk. So first thing first, I always recommend using a kind of a simple design. None of these kind of uh, patterned or I don't know what to call them, designerly looking PowerPoint formats. It's easiest if you build this in uh, Google Slides because that's the way that I would recommend you create it and then just share it. And the idea is that we're going to share it. One, you'll share the slides with me. Two, you'll share a video with me. Three, you'll share your exhibition proposal with me, all in the Google Drive folder that I've created and have linked into D2L. Now, we won't normally use Google Slides well, we'll use Google Slides, but we won't use Google Drive to turn things in. But for this purpose, you're going to each give each other peer feedback on your recorded talk. The small groups, I shouldn't say everyone. So what I'm saying is photo or PowerPoint isn't necessarily where you should start, but this is a PowerPoint that I have about creating these sorts of PowerPoints in the past, pre-pandemic situation. So you might not have all these available, but just keep it simple is the idea. So um, you don't want to use capital text. You don't want to have these overlapping colors and text. Just keep it simple, and I would recommend um, just make it so we focus on your work. Have just a clean white or black, and I would strongly recommend a black background. I actually have a slide about that in a minute. um, but keep it so it's easy on our eyes. Make it so it focuses on your work. um, let's see. So just none of these sort of silly backgrounds. um, just one typeface, one background color, one type color for your presentation. um, all right, let's see. Particularly, I recommend the difference between a white background and black text versus a black background and white text. I prefer the black background and white text because it's actually less bright on your eyes. And as you know, these days we're all staring at screens for many more hours a day than we should be. So if it's easier on your eyes, it's easier on everyone's eyes. Just kind of flipping back and forth between those two. So this is what I recommend. Just keep it a 3:4 proportion slideshow. Keep your text simple and white, black background, and actually make your photos bigger. But we'll get to talking about that more in a bit. In your kind of intro opening slide, just start with your name and your area of concentration or the medium you work in. Usually one or two different types of font or slight variations in font is good, so you can kind of add emphasis somewhere, but keep them similar in font style, size. You don't go from like a well, don't use calligraphy ever, any script font. But a sans serif font is usually clean and modern feeling. That means it doesn't have the chisel marks. If it's a serif font, it looks more old fashioned. It's actually easier to read traditionally, but I would keep it modern because you are a contemporary working artist. So here's like an example, one that I've always liked. So what are you? What's your area? What's your media? And I don't know if everyone agrees on what calling these things. I always say illustrator instead of drawer because drawer sounds weird, but whatever you're comfortable with and whatever kind of seems to be the professional term in your field. So just some recommended fonts: Arial, Helvetica, Verdana, Times New Roman, Georgia. I'm sure that the graphic designers in the class can recommend some even more modern feeling fonts. But the idea is keep it simple. 11 to 14 point font usually works well. I normally do 11-point font for the text that goes with an image. So like here's an example of what I mean by that is having it under the image, your title, your medium, your dimensions, your year. And I have a lot of examples in here of ones I don't like and what I would, don't, what not to do more than what to do. But I'll show you a different slideshow at the end of one that I always thought was clean, professional, and have used for the example in the scholarship submissions as a good example. So this is saying, hey, yellow, why yellow? No, just keep it simple, black and white for the text in the background. There's also some things in here that you'll notice is that like the title is bold. I think the title's actually italicized too. So it's, it sort of stands out. And traditionally, I think you italicize the title. The dimensions, if you're going to have numbers, you'd have the X or you could have by, but it's important to have a describer. Is this 22 by 25 feet? Is this 22 by 25 inches, centimeters, what? And then for the year, don't include months, just include the year of completion. Don't overpopulate your slides. You want the text to be small and out of the way and not distracting. I've seen it done really well where people have lined up their images in a way where you can kind of swap it from vertical to horizontal and it always stays sort of centered on the slide. But then the text is small and out of the way down to the bottom right, kind of like you would see it in a show. You'd always have the artwork, and then the artwork label is traditionally to the right and kind of down out of the way where it's less noticeable. So for example, this is actually way larger and more space in between the lines than it needs to be. And you read the text first, and then you look at the artwork, and it's always better to let the artwork kind of be seen first. And also kind of having it line up. And I think it's okay if you have it consistently placed where it doesn't respond to the image. So it's sort of some of the text not lining up with the image. I think it could line up with the image, meaning that it could be condensed down to the bottom of the frame, but it doesn't need to like follow the image wherever the image goes. The images should be fairly static, but yeah. All right, so nice and centered, some space around it, small. This is, in this case, it's 12-point font. It's aligned to the side of the image. It doesn't need to stay aligned to the side of the image. It could be centered. It could be, put in a corner. But this is, if you have consistently sized images, having them relatively line up under the image is good. What you don't want is to have the text essentially, your images stay the same size and the text are jumping all over the place. So what I tend to do is make one slide of the image that's going to take up the most room on the page. And I insert the text or even just a placeholder for the text. And I just copy that slide 20 times. And I will swap out the images, try and get them to pop in the same place, and swap out the text, but have it be a consistent placeholder for where the text gets lined up. All right, so that seems nice. There's no indicator for inches. There's no need for September. Digital laser print, I don't actually know what that means necessarily. If it's a laser print, it's a laser print. Saying it's digital doesn't matter. But these are nice and consistent, right? The kind of 2- can work for inches versus 1 for feet. That's fine. Again, don't need the October or September, but those are fairly consistent. So text that tracks to the image, if you have a lot of variety in images where the image is like this and then this, some people find that distracting. I don't necessarily, but some people find it distracting when the text is moving all over. So I might just keep it centered under the bottom or keep it kind of in the bottom right corner. Don't do transitions. No transitions ever. None needed. It just gets annoying. So like this is an example where the text would remain in one corner consistently. Another transition. Ugh, transitions. Hate transitions. Don't do transitions. they're distracting. I know some of you have been told by other teachers that you have to keep people's attention by having transitions, but no, a professional artist talk does not need that. You should be engaged with the work and the conversation going around by the artist talking about their work. So you don't need that. So photographs, make sure you have the best quality photographs. You really, especially these days, being that we don't have access necessarily to photograph our work with a copy stand or other means with studio lights. It's really important that you try, because these are images that you're going to use in the future showing your portfolio. So you got to try and come up with new creative ways of photographing your work. So they should always be color balanced. If you don't know what that means, just always photograph with daylight, meaning like open up your windows, your curtains, whatever. A cloudy day is great. You don't actually want sunlight directly on the work. So cloudy like we're getting these days is wonderful. Just turn off all the other lights in your house and only just take the work over by the window and work by window light. Okay. Don't use flash. That's just going to cause shadows, and that's going to be distracting. Make sure they're sharp. So get close enough where you're not going to have any major problems with resolution. You're not zooming in from super far away. And use a tripod, or if you don't have a tripod, set it on the edge of a table or something solid so that the camera doesn't shake, because that's how you'll get blurry images. And then carefully crop them. So I should say, related to that is make sure that you have clean backgrounds, especially for 3D work. With 2D work, typically you're working in say a painting is going to be rectangular. You'll crop out the background, that's fine. But 3D work, you want to have a neutral, non-distracting colored background. So if you've just got like a white wall in your apartment as the background, great, that's fine. If you've got a gray or a white or even maybe black bed sheet that you can just like hang or drape over something to use as background, that is way better than having your other art in the background, or your messy bedroom, or anything of that sort. In the studio, I would say use a gray sweep and use window light, because window light's always the easiest. Okay, so here's some examples of bad photographs with green color casts and flash, and they're cropped way too tight, so you're losing some of the artwork. And there's color shifts because there's two different directions, or two different types of light. There's like a green light coming in from this side and a yellow, probably sunlight, coming in from this side. So just make sure you're working with that one window light. And the other thing you can do is, if you have like heavy shadows from window light, which you won't get on a cloudy day, but if you had heavy shadows for some reason, if you're working too far away from the window, if you just take a piece of white poster board or white printer paper or a white sheet or something like that and hold it up, it'll bounce the light back into the shadows. So that will save you a lot of trouble later. All right, so crop off the edges of white images. This is like an old photograph that was then scanned, I think. Don't include two images on one side. It's just, we can hold our attention long enough to go from one to the other. And the only reason that this would be allowed, I guess is what I'm saying, is that it's like the finished piece versus the piece in progress. But I'd much still rather see them larger and just one slide after the other. And the scale difference is a little problematic. So I would have just made this one equal in size to this one height-wise. Okay. Be cautious of distracting backgrounds. Don't abbreviate everything. We don't need page numbers. Yeah. Okay. Try to make sure you get the whole object in. Step back further if you can't, and you can see that with this one you get a lot of distortion. If you don't, here's a piece that's black, right? And so this student put a 1 pixel outline around it, and that's a wonderful thing to do. Makes it much easier on the eye to kind of get an idea for what the actual artwork is versus what's the background. So definitely good to do that. And then just be careful what your media is. right? And the media, I don't know if I said this before, but if you're an artist that works digitally, you should be focusing on what is your media when the piece actually gets displayed in an exhibition. Not how does it live right now, but what media will it be when it is actually displayed. So if we're gonna print it on an inkjet printer, then it's an inkjet print, not a digital photograph. Is something I always see. So just be conscious of what will the actual finished media be, and ask your instructor to make sure that you're getting the right media. And I'm not an expert on all media, so I will ask you, and I will ask you to ask someone in your area of concentration to be sure. And if they say it's good, you're good. So just be sure. And then when you get to a larger artist talk, you'll need to turn in an outline. For the intro artist talk, you don't need to, but a full outline with an example of what you're going to say on each slide. Not everything you're going to say. I don't want a script, but we'll come back to this when we talk more about the final artist talk. All right, so then this is kind of outdated and redundant, but I'm gonna skip over all the digital stuff and say, just make sure you spell check everything. Okay, and then I'm gonna switch over to my example here. And there's actually been things in my example that I have found in more recent time that I think could be perfected. I don't know if I'll remember them all right now, but here's what we always show for the example of what an ideal artist talk or a slideshow would look like for the scholarship submission. And I'll try and remember if I can any of these, but you normally do your title, medium, year, date. You will insert your name and media in the first slide. Details. Okay, so details is something I think it's important to talk about. If you give us a detail for every single piece, it kind of gets boring. If you have work that really has amazing, unique detail in every single image, that's wonderful. In which case, go for it. This artist works primarily with, most of the work of what I remember of this person is ballpoint on paper. Okay, and so giving one detail of that ballpoint on paper is great. So, for example, like this setup has this piece has 9 kind of individual pieces. They give us one detail, right? Then they come over and this is mixed media on paper. Okay, so what I was trying to say was, if you're doing ballpoint figure work for 20 pieces, we probably only need detail on a couple of them, right? The reason I'm sort of backtracking on what I was saying was this artist they're doing different media for each piece. And so the details are maybe a little bit more justified, but they still don't give them on every single piece, right? So anyway, what was I going to say? When I flip through these, particularly the full-size ones, the text does move around. Some people find that distracting. But if all of your works are the same dimensions and aspect ratio, particularly, and say they're all vertical, then the text will stay in one place. So I'm not quite sure what I was trying to say there, but this is a good example, and you should do your best to kind of, I like the spacing around the work. I like the size of the font. I like the way they've labeled most things. It's a real quality presentation. So take a look at it. But this is really what we want to focus on in designing our presentation. When we actually go to talking about it, I think it's important to say that you want to give a good introduction and a good conclusion. And your introduction should sort of tell us who you are, what area you work in, and then immediately to your thesis, which is what is the meaning of your work, or the sort of trends in your work, perhaps if you have a few different bodies of work right now. So we can kind of get an idea of what connects everything. when you go through, think of it like you write a paper. You got your intro, you got your thesis, you got your body. So the work is the body, you get to the end. And when you're done talking about the last piece, you conclude. You give us a sort of summary of your thesis. And maybe you kind of end it by talking about what you're planning to do next. And in this case, you're sort of introducing what you're going to do this semester. So tell us what your senior thesis exhibition will be about, what your project is going to be developing. And then when you're completely done, say thank you. And that's a cue that I think is really important when we're on Zoom or watching a recording, I suppose is what we're really going to be doing. So we know that you're done. Otherwise, it can be awkward. I suppose when you're done, you're going to just stop hitting record. But for an artist talk that you'll be doing later in the semester, it's good to kind of practice that thank you, because then we know it's time for Q&A. Okay? Thank you.